Okay, we're going to get going here. We got 15 minutes with James McAvity, CEO of Corment. Great conversation on all things Bitcoin mining happening here right now. It's a 15-minute presentation, so be sure to stay strapped to that seat. James, welcome to the stage.
All right. Thanks for coming, all 27 of you. My name is Jamie McAvity. I'm one of the 4 co-founders and the current CEO of Corment. And Corment is a West Texas headquartered Bitcoin miner. And I got 15 minutes on stage today. You know, plenty of the big bucks for sponsorship. They give you 15 minutes. So I'm going to talk about why Bitcoin mining is good for the state of Texas, why Texas is a great place to be a Bitcoin miner, how this symbiotic relationship is really not an accident when you look at the history of the state, and then kind of take a look at what the future holds and what lies ahead. All right, so back up in time, January 3rd, 1985. I was born in Houston, Texas on a snowy winter day, and it doesn't often snow in Texas, and it's also equally rare that a child is born with such luscious locks like that. So 2 very rare occurrences on that day. But it wasn't until about 24 years later that the significance of that day truly dug in, which was, of course, the Genesis block day, January 3rd, 2009, when Satoshi mined the Genesis block and the Bitcoin protocol officially launched. And about 4 years after the Genesis block was when I went through the rite of passage of most Bitcoiners, which is where I bought the all-time high of the market in 2013. Within 12 months, I was down 95%. And I said, this is definitely for me, so I'm sticking around. But I actually do have West Texas roots. So my mother was born in Levelland, Texas. I'm currently a very proud Fort Stockton resident. And a little story of our company and how we came to be headquartered there is me and my business partners, we started our first mine in a very northern New York, freezing cold garage. And we built some homemade GPUs, bought some ASICs, learned the very hard lessons about Bitcoin mining through our first couple of years. We discovered West Texas was probably the best place on earth to do this business. So we relocated our company headquarters here in 2021, and we actually acquired a decommissioned wind farm as our first Bitcoin mining location. So hard to imagine why they would tear down a wind turbine generation facility because there's no input cost for the energy. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. Basically, we repurposed the infrastructure from that wind farm and we turned it into a mine. And so, yeah, that's our flagship location, and our headquarters is out there in Pecos County, which is actually, kind of sadly, the #1 stranded renewable energy jurisdiction in the entire country, which means that they actually curtail renewable energy generation out there for more megawatt hours than any other place in the country. So we're very proud to be out in Fort Stockton, and the way that we built our business and our strategy is really we are there to soak up excess and stranded renewable power. So we have some very good and very sensitive software that responds to pricing in the ERCOT marketplace. Usually when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing hard, those are the times when we're mining, and when neither of those things is happening, we are shut down. So we're only mining actually about 85% of the year, which is a lot lower than most other miners. So we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Texas. We have here in North America, which is now the #1 mining jurisdiction in the world. 2,400 of those megawatts are in Texas of the 4,000. So Texas is the #1 state in the #1 country for Bitcoin mining globally. And over on the right, I looked really hard for a bunch of charts, but I could only find an 8-month-old chart that showed Corment as the highest gross margin producer, unfortunately, in my research. So forgive the 8-month-old chart there with us as #1. But as you can see, 3 of the top 4 firms in terms of electricity gross margin are in Texas. So Texas is the very best at doing this Bitcoin mining business. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about how the market structure here in Texas leads to that outcome, and kind of what's required to retain the lead, because there is quite a bit of competition coming. So a couple of characteristics about the Texas marketplace. It's a fully deregulated marketplace, which basically means the difference between a deregulated and a regulated electricity marketplace is that in a regulated marketplace, the grid, Texas is the ERCOT grid, it's called an ISO. The grid basically buys all of the market volatility. So they don't let the price go up and down quite a bit. And to buy that volatility, it costs money. and they basically subsidize the cost of that volatility by charging higher baseline power prices to all the consumers in the marketplace. In a deregulated marketplace like Texas, they rely on a market price signal to price that volatility. So Texas power prices go down to as low as negative $30 and as high as $5,000 a megawatt hour. So it's extremely volatile, but because they allow the market to price that volatility and they don't buy all that volatility themselves, what ends up happening, as you can see, is Texas ends up having much lower cost of power than other much more regulated grids. It's also the interconnection process and the regulatory environment here is great. That's why Texas is rapidly growing in terms of renewable energy penetration. So you can see from 2008 to 2028, the amount of renewable energy that's installed here is growing rapidly. And the combination of these two kind of effects, the deregulated marketplace and a lot of intermittent renewable energy, it is a perfect fit for Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining, the right way to think about it in an electricity market context is that it is an economically perfect consumer of electricity, meaning every minute of every day, there's a very clear economic decision of should you mine or should you not mine? And you do a calculation where you basically convert Bitcoin mining revenue into a dollars per megawatt hour price, and then you respond to that price signal. And so when you have this crazy volatile market with lots of renewable energy that's relying on the strength of the sun or the speed of the wind, and you have these flexible loads that can go up and down and respond to pricing, you have a really, really good combination. And so what we do, like I said earlier, we consume when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. We curtail about 15% of the year when those two things aren't happening. And this is the industry on aggregate. So our friend Evan Neal from ERCOT is here, and he's on a task force here in Texas called the Large Flexible Load Task Force. Basically, Bitcoin miners are large flexible loads, which means we're over 25 megawatts, let's say in size per company, and we're extremely flexible, meaning an entire Bitcoin mining load can ramp down 95% of its consumption in a matter of seconds. There's really no other participants in an electricity marketplace who are like that. So a very new type of electricity market participant, and ERCOT, in kind of consistent with the regulatory framework that the state uses, letting the free market work, welcoming innovation in the state, they have established this task force to study, learn, and ideally form some really good reactive regulation that helps continue to make the industry competitive and also gives the grid what it needs to maintain reliability. So this is an example of one of the scarcity events from this last summer was extremely hot in the state, where on September 6th, the price of electricity went above $85 a megawatt hour, which is 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and you could see the roughly 2,000 megawatts of mining load was down by 95% within, the majority of it happened within a few seconds or few minutes, and then all of it was down in about an hour. So this is a form of organic demand response. Some of these miners were paid to shut off, but over at Corman, and there are many other miners like this, we're just doing what's in our economic best interest, and we're responding to price. So we are actually providing organic demand response to the grid, and we're only relying on a free market price signal. That's fucking amazing. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I'm sorry for cursing, but it really is an amazing thing that you have this participant in the market who's responding to price, and they're shutting off their load when the grid is scarce and the electricity is needed for people to keep their homes cool or whatever else, keep the hospital lights on. So very important load characteristic of Bitcoin mining, and this large flexible load task force has basically been implemented to study and help craft regulation for the industry. And it's really not an accident that it's like this. 1999 is when we go back, we wanted some cues on what's going on here. Of course, that was when Britney Spears hit with Baby One More Time, launching the pop culture boom of the early 2000s. But also, equally sexy, ERCOT and the Capitol were deregulating the Texas electricity market, which is also very important and big news. Everyone was paying attention to that, right? So that move allowed this free market pricing signal to happen. It was 9 years before Bitcoin was even invented. So Texas was already doing this before you had this perfect free market consumer of electricity come about. Really interesting. And then it's no mistake that 2,000 megawatts of mining load shows up here in response to this volatile free market electricity environment. And we're continuing a tradition that's been going on in this state for a century. So 1901, the discovery of the Spindletop oil field out in West Texas. led to the creation of a very sensible, practical, and excellent regulatory framework for drilling for oil and gas. That's led Texas to have the 6th largest economy in the entire world, extremely resilient commitment to free markets, and that continues through the last century. In the 60s, traveling to space with the Johnson Space Center, that started here as well. Now you have that happening in the private sector with SpaceX. We're launching rockets down there from the private sector in Boca Chica. And that's because in the 1960s, we paved the way to do that with the Johnson Space Center. And then more recently, the last 20 or 30 years, as we talked about a few slides ago, the growth of renewable energy. That was a bunch of renewable energy getting installed here. It created some issues with the way that the grid is administered because renewable generation is a little bit tricky compared to your typical natural gas plant, coal plant. And so ERCOT came up with a framework to build a reliable transmission system and operating system around those renewables. And this is a regulatory tradition that we're building on the shoulders of here. We are building in a state that lets the free market happen, and then they react to it, and they come up with a framework that keeps that free market number one, which is, it's honestly, it's no accident that things are booming here. And as a Bitcoin miner who came from New York, I can tell you it is not like that in New York. You don't feel welcome. Regulators aren't showing up. They have punitive legislation all over the place, regulatory uncertainty. It's happening on a federal level as well with the SEC, CFTC. There's a lot of headwinds to building a Bitcoin business here. And now we're getting all these wonderful Bitcoin and cryptocurrency businesses that are thriving in Texas because there's clear-cut regulatory framework, and that's a tradition of the state. So competition is coming. This is now a state-level game. So there's the chat GPT, guys looking for Bitcoins in the middle of wind farms. Of course, that's the way it works. You just, find them in the ground, you walk by them. But El Salvador, happening on a state level, building Bitcoin mines. Paraguay, building Bitcoin mines in their hydro dam. Oman's investing $1 billion in Bitcoin mining. So this is a state level action that is happening now. And Texas, is at the forefront of competing against all of these nation states. But we're going to have to be proactive in order to retain the number one spot. And what's at stake? Right now, you might think, okay, yeah, Bitcoin, a bunch of guys down in their mother's basement having fun, trading their internet Pokemon cards. And, relative to the other industries that we're talking about here, it is small. It's much smaller than gold. It's smaller than treasuries. Obviously, much smaller than the U.S. stock market. But money is the largest market in the world. There is literally no market in the entire world that could be bigger than this because the sum of global GDP, which is $100 trillion, that's goods and services. And every single one of those goods and services is traded for some form of money. So Bitcoin is competing to be the best form of money in the world, and the prize is massive. So now the point I'm trying to make here is this is a strategically significant industry for the state to be cultivating here. It's kind of happening because the state has this wonderful tradition to free markets, great regulatory environments, and innovation. And now we have this massive early lead with all this market share. And, I'm all in on this. Me and my business partners are all in on this. We live out in Fort Stockton. We're living the dream out there in West Texas. But my ask today, or I guess what I would really love to say to you all is, to the miners, to my fellow miners, it's Texas versus the world. I know that we are all competing against each other in one way or another, but really, we are going to be as successful as the policies in our state allow us to be. And that is going to facilitate our success. So I would encourage us all to continue thinking as Texas versus the world rather than digging in and start thinking about one another as competitors, because we really are competing on a global game. To the Texas Bitcoiners in the audience, Bitcoin, it benefits from this wonderful organic phenomenon where it has probably dozens of world-class chief marketing officer level people working on it, and not a single one of them is paid. They are these impressive people from all kinds of different disciplines. They work tirelessly to evangelize and support Bitcoin, and none of them earn any money. We all have the same bag, so everybody's trying to work towards the same goal. It's a beautiful thing, but we have to be inspiring. We have to be admirable. There's a lot of great writers and speakers in this room. Take the high road, educate, make yourself as impressive and polished as possible so that people want to hear what you have to say, and keep up the good work. And lastly, to the regulators and politicians, thank you thank you very, very much. Thank you to Evan from ERCOT. Thank you to the state and all the hardworking people over at ERCOT for what they've done. We sincerely appreciate it. And what I would say is, I know that there are some people who have controversial opinions about Bitcoin mining in the state, maybe some regulators, legislatures. The more Bitcoin mining that there is in the state, the less power volatility there's going to be. There's going to be a stronger signal for generation to get built. More of that stranded renewable power is going to get soaked up. More renewables will get built. The power market will be healthy and more reliable. And so don't think of it as a bad thing that's wasting energy. Think of it as a volatility balancing, positive contributor to the grid, and ultimately one that can improve reliability for the state and make the grid as strong as possible. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to the 2023 North American Blockchain Summit. It was the best summit yet. We look forward to hosting you again next year. If you enjoyed the summit or like what you saw in this video, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about membership in the TBC, go to texasblockchaincouncil.org to learn more.